Welcome back, gang. Alright, so we'll do this fairly quickly. Should take us about 15 minutes here. I want to talk about a very special form of intrinsic motivation. We actually call it flow experience. I've also put on the portal, on Blackboard, a short, I think it's 15, maybe it's 18 minutes, an 18-minute video with Mahai Csikszentmihalyi. Dr. Csikszentmihalyi is an eminent psychologist who is at the University of Chicago, and he is best known for his theory of flow experience. I was lucky when I was at the University of Utah doing my PhD. I had Dr. Kevin Refundi, who used to work with Mahai Csikszentmihalyi at the University of Chicago, and he was on my graduate dissertation committee, and I got to talk a lot about optimal experience, which is what flow is. So I'm going to take a little bit of time right now in this section on reinforcement and on this section to talk about optimal experience. Now, flow is a special case of intrinsic motivation. So we call it a holistic, intrinsically motivating sensation that people feel when they are totally involved or totally immersed in an activity. Sometimes we call it automatic pilot. Michael Jordan, for instance. So again, Michael Jordan, you know, one of my favorite all-time athletes, but he always talked about sometimes he would shoot baskets and the basket would be like a dustbin. I mean, it looked like a huge garbage can. It looked so big, he felt like he could never miss. Wayne Gretzky, when he used to play, you know, he had a phenomenal scoring percentage, but he would say that, you know, he just felt one with the ice, and he just felt that, you know, everything around him seemed to slow down, and he would feel like he could move faster, and the goal, rather than that small little goal of a goaltender, where he said when he used to shoot, you know, it looked much bigger to him. So, you know, we're talking about almost a transformation of time and experience for a lot of these athletes that have these flow or in the zone experiences. So let's go ahead and talk about flow more specifically, and hopefully you learned a little bit more about flow by watching the video that I put online for you. Okay, so I'm going to draw it. Probably the easiest way to describe it is to draw and show you what it looks like. So flow experience, another name for flow would be optimal experience. So optimal experience is another name. We also call it in the zone type experiences. You know, you've heard that phrase, I'm sure. But let's go ahead and draw what flow might look like. So we can draw it as a graph. And on this axis we can put skill. This is high skill. This is low skill. And on this axis let's put challenge. Low and high. Okay, so in sports we are always going to have an ability level, which means we're always going to have a certain level of skill, and there's always going to be a challenge that presents itself. You know, it could be the team we're playing against, an individual we're facing, but there's always going to be a level of challenge to playing sports. So skill and challenge. Now, flow occurs when we have a balance of challenge and skill. So for instance, some athletes who don't have very much skill can still have an optimal experience if a challenge is also low. So for instance, if you've never been rock climbing before and somebody takes you to a rock climbing gym, you know, you're excited, it's a new experience, you're not right away going to go climb, you know, overhangs or try and take on 512 crack climbing and that kind of stuff. You're probably going to do some of the easier climbs. So your skill level, if you've never been climbing before, is very low, and the walls that they're going to put you on are probably not too challenging. So you can still have an optimal and positive experience. Now, as you get better, you know, you can progress. So maybe now you've been going for a few weeks, you've been climbing for a few weeks, your skill has got better, and so now you do some slightly more challenging walls and rock faces. So you can still have a flow experience, but now you're having a flow experience here. Now you really have been going for a year, 2 years to class, and your skill has got really good. And now the instructors take you out to the canyons to have you do some real hardcore climbing. And you start to do some overhangs, you start to climb some cracks. Now your optimal experience is happening up here. So you can see it from beginning to intermediate to advanced climbing, you can still have a flow experience, but there still has to be a match of skill and challenge. All right? Now, what happens when you have an experience where your skill level is very, very high, but the challenge presented is not very good? So for instance, maybe your coach, you're an ice hockey team, and for a preseason scrimmage, he schedules you against a middle school team. Well, that doesn't exactly give you a lot of challenge, particularly for a college team which is nationally ranked and really strong. Okay, so what type of emotion is that going to elicit? Well, high skill, low challenge, first of all, you're going to be bored. Okay, so if you've got a high skill level and the challenge is not very high, you're going to feel pretty bored. You may even feel apathy and not very excited. Okay, so that's probably not a flow experience. Likewise, what happens when the challenge is really high, but you don't have the skills and the abilities to meet that challenge? Then you're going to have something else happen. We're going to meet that word anxiety. So all of those things we talked about in class with, blood pressure going through the roof, respirations through the roof, heart rate racing, like the butterflies in our stomach, the sweating, wanting to go to the bathroom, distortion of concentration, muscle tension. All of those things are going to be here when the challenge is really, really high and we don't have the skills to be able to meet it. Going back to the rock climbing example, first time rock climbing, and then your instructor or a friend takes you out to, into the wilderness, and there's this crack you have to climb, and you get halfway up and you freeze, and you've never been climbing before, and you can't find a foothold, and the wind's pushing you and around, and you're scared and you're shaking. Are you likely to go back climbing again? Probably not, because you had an anxiety and fear full experience. Okay, so anxiety and fear is going to happen right here, and some people just might get angry. So this might be anger or frustration that might actually result from a high challenge, low skill scenario. All right, so neither of those situations are desirable. So this is one way of looking at flow. I'll show you another graphic, which would be another way that flow is presented, and I think in your textbook it's presented differently also. Let's talk about some of the characteristics of flow. Well, let's go ahead and see what we have to say here. So the essential elements of a flow experience. First of all, balance of challenge and skill. So these things have to be balanced for us to have that optimal in-the-zone flow experience. Another huge characteristic of flow is we've got to be completely immersed and completely absorbed and completely focused in the activity in order to have a flow experience, an optimal experience. There needs to be clear goals, and also going along with goals, we need to also have unambiguous and clear feedback. Usually the coach would be responsible for giving that in order to have flow. Merging of action and awareness, so everything that we're doing. Sometimes when I talk to rock climbers and they talk about climbing the rock face, I know when I climb, I'm looking down and I'm pretty freaked out and scared because it's a long way down. But when you talk to rock climbers climb, they talk about how they feel one with the rock face. That almost their action and awareness merges to the rock face, and the here and now and their movement is focused right here in this space. It's not about getting to the top, it's not about how far am I off the ground, it's all about what's happening right here. And dancers talk about this in the same way. Good gymnasts who are performing a difficult routine on apparatus will talk about merging of action and awareness. They can't even hear their teammates or the coaches screaming and yelling at them because they're so completely absorbed in the activity. Total concentration and focus on the task at hand is also a characteristic of flow. Some other characteristics of flow: loss of self-consciousness. You don't care what you look like anymore because you're so engaged in the activity, the zone experience is happening, and you don't care what you're doing or how you look because you're so involved in the moment. You feel a sense of control, a sense of mastery in the activity. The goal of the activity itself becomes its own reward. That's what I mean by no goals or rewards external to the activity. Somebody who's having a flow experience when they're on the basketball court doesn't even care about the win, doesn't even care about the championship perhaps, because they are so involved and immersed in the activity that just playing and the feelings and sensations that they're getting by playing the game is the reward in itself. one of my favorite characteristics is transformation of time. How many of you have played a favorite video game? And you've been playing this video game and, you know, time sort of gets away from you. You look at the clock and you somehow missed dinner. 5 hours of your life have just disappeared on you just because time seems to have raced on by. Well, that's transformation of time. So when you are having a flow experience, time goes by fast. Now, some people have talked about how time slows down for them. That could also be a different transformation of time. Effortless movement is another characteristic of the flow model, and we definitely see this in sports, where we just feel that everything is easy and everything is not labored. Effortless movement. This is the different model that I was telling you about that is often presented. It differs a little bit from what I have on the board. But basically it is similar. So here we've got skill. So we've got low to high, a continuum from low to high. Then we've got average in the middle. And then here we've got challenge, again, from low to high. So up here, just like I have on the board, when we've got low skills and high challenge, we've got anxiety happening. Okay? Now, another way to look at apathy is when our skills are low and the challenge is low, we don't really care. We're kind of apathetic. We just sit there. Some of us have sat through classes like this where the material is so easy and so easy to understand. There's no real challenge. We don't even need much skill to be able to do well in the class, and so we're just kind of apathetic. We don't even care to be there. I hate to say it, but sometimes the early freshman experience classes were a little bit like this. So people thought it was kind of a waste of their time to go. They were very apathetic because the challenge of the class was not very high, and we didn't really need a lot of skill to be able to do well in the class. So that would be apathy. Now, up here we've got boredom. So what happens when we have low challenge and high skill? So we have a lot of skill, and the challenge just doesn't meet our proficiency level. Well, we're going to be bored. We're going to find it very difficult to get excited about the contest. Now, in this graphic, it says that when challenge is high and skill is high, that's the only time we can have flow experiences. Now, I gave you this diagram because in my experience, and I think a lot of researchers agree with me, this is not necessarily true. So you can actually still have an optimal flow experience at low levels of challenge, even when you also have low levels of skill. I mean, I still remember activities that I first learned. I remember when I first started to ride a horse. I was nervous when I was learning how to ride, and I didn't have a lot of skill, but fortunately, I was in an arena being led and had an instructor who took care of me, who didn't push me too fast and too quickly, and so the challenge wasn't very high either. But I still had very positive emotional experiences, which are very much like flow. Now when I go out and ride, I can jump fences and go over hedges, my skill level's much higher, and I need a little bit more challenge. So I still think it's possible to have flow experiences even at low skill and low challenge levels. So right here where we've got apathy happening, we could actually still have a flow experience, providing the situation is conducive and right for it. Likewise, we could still have a flow experience even here at average skill levels and with average challenge. All right, controllability of flow states. Although athletes cannot control flow, they can certainly increase the probability of this occurring. Coaches also can engineer environments and experiences to make it more conducive for athletes to experience flow. So good coaches are always engineering their practices, trying to give their players these optimal experiences. When you have optimal experiences, research suggests that you enjoy what you're doing more, and you are much more likely to perform at a higher level. So how do we achieve it? So first of all, we've got to have motivation. Flow is an intrinsic motivation phenomenon. Okay, so we've got to be motivated to perform. So we've got to maintain this balance between challenge, goals, and skills. So another way, how do we achieve it? Achieve optimal arousal before performing. So we don't want to go into a contest with our level of arousal too low, and where we have to sort of get our arousal up during the course of play. Well, that might mean that we've missed the boat on hitting this optimal experience. We've got to maintain an appropriate focus, stay in the present, focus on key points, and finally use pre-competitive and competitive plans and preparation. I love coaches who actually have a pre-game routine for their players. I do this. For my 4x1 relay team, when we went to competitions this past year in preparation for the Olympic Games, we went through exactly the same pre-race routine for every single competition. When we got to the Olympic Games, it was exactly the same. When I used to coach soccer, we went through a pre-game routine which was exactly the same for every single game. The drills were the same. We ran the field together as a team. The stretching routine was the same. We didn't put anything new into our pre-game routine because we wanted to set up a situation where we were ready and prepared to compete. Achieve optimal physical preparation. Yeah, we're going to have these optimal experiences when we're in good shape. So coaches that make their athletes run in the preseason aren't doing it to penalize or punish you. They're doing it to try and make sure that you are in good peak condition so that you can actually have these optimal experiences. Experience optimal environment, situational conditions. Sometimes coaches have to engineer that. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of say sometimes in what happens when we go to away competitions, but you bet we have all the opportunity to make sure our home games have optimal environmental and situational conditions that give us a home field advantage. Exhibit confidence and positive mental attitude. Huge. Okay, so coaches can model this, but we have to hope that our athletes already have this personality characteristic or this trait towards a positive mental attitude, because one of the characteristics of flow is that it cannot actually occur unless there's positive affect and positive emotion. So players have to be positive and have a positive mental attitude in order to be able to experience flow. Have positive team play and interaction. The more positive those relationships and interactions are between players on a team, the more likely we are to have more players experience flow. And feel good about your performance. So again, got to feel good about what you're doing, and coaches should take the time to socially reinforce and praise and point out what players do well so that everybody can feel good about what they did on the field. There are also factors that prevent flow from occurring. So the big ones are injury fatigue and just not feeling right physically or not feeling prepared. So they're the non-optimal physical preparation and readiness type factors. Okay? Injury and fatigue are the big ones. Athletes that are going through burnout or are overtrained or maybe are experiencing staleness. Athletes that are actually hurt or just really tired because they've been pushed too hard. And they're athletes that might just be sick or ill. All of those may prevent flow experiences from occurring. Also, non-optimal environmental and situational factors like external stresses. Maybe a player broke up with his or her girlfriend, had a death in the family. Sometimes we have crowd becomes a factor in uncontrollable influences like the weather or a facility condition, bad referees. All of these could be situations that might prevent flow. We also have some psychological factors that might prevent flow from occurring, like negative mental states. So negative thinking, ants, we talked about those. Those annoying negative thoughts that swim around in our head. That can be a huge detriment to us being able to experience flow. Doubt, and then not feeling like we are in control of our mental condition, our mental state. Inappropriate focus is also a condition that might prevent us from experiencing flow. Sometimes we overthink things. Sometimes we worry about what others are doing or what others are thinking about us. We get frustrated with other teammates on our team. We may be attending to past events or future events or what we're going to be doing after the game. We may sort of turn off a little bit because the score is so high we don't think the other team can come back, and so that might be a factor. But inappropriate focus and concentration is definitely an issue when we're talking about flow. Pre-competitive preparation, if there is poor pre-competitive preparation or there's a distraction before the competition, or we may even get an interruption. Sometimes we're warming up for an event and suddenly there's a thunderstorm or a lightning storm that comes through and suddenly we can't go out onto the field. Or like in the Super Bowl, we saw this happen just recently when the lights went out and it almost cost the Ravens the Super Bowl because it stopped their flow in its tracks. That team was having a phenomenal game and suddenly the lights go out and they got out of flow. They got out of that great positive condition, that focus went a little bit, and it almost let the 49ers back in the game. And lacking motivation, so having no goals, not being challenge-oriented, having low arousal or low levels of motivation. All of these are also factors that prevent flow from occurring. Last few here, not feeling relaxed or perhaps sometimes feeling too relaxed. So these would be non-optimal arousal levels. Negative team play and interactions. If a team's not performing well or performing at a low standard, or you're suddenly not feeling a part of a team, negative talk within the team can actually be a factor that might be a negative team interaction factor. And if performance is just going poorly, like we're making a lot of errors, or the technique is not good, or we have a game plan and for whatever reason the team is not being able to play to the game plan. Stoppages in play, like we saw at the Super Bowl. Sometimes we focus too much on what the opposition is doing. We may disagree with referee decisions and let referees get in our head. Inappropriate, negative, or no feedback. If we have a coach on the sideline that's screaming at us or giving us inappropriate feedback, that can help disrupt flow. And the last few things here, we've got lack of physical preparation, injury during the competition, and fatigue. All physical readiness issues that might disrupt flow. Couple of last ones here. Negative talk on the field, lack of team interaction, lack of team cohesiveness, team is just not playing up to the standard they're capable of. How about this? Inappropriate focus, daydreaming, loss of concentration, worrying about other people's ability rather than focusing on just yourself. Again, inappropriate focus dimensions. Doubting self and putting pressure on self is another factor. And that pretty much wraps up optimal experience. But flow is really vital. And from a sports psychology standpoint, we focus a lot on this. We want athletes to have these in-the-zone performances, which means that there needs to be a match of challenge and skill. We've got to teach athletes to be able to maintain attention and focus and be able to concentrate, not doubt their ability levels, to maintain high levels of self-confidence. We'll talk more about this as we get into some of the techniques and the skills that we use in helping athletes in psychological skills training. But flow is a fundamental part of sports. The more optimal experiences can be, the more the likelihood is that an athlete is going to perform at a high level. All right, gang, thank you for hanging in there with me and going through this. Please look in your book and you can actually read a little bit more about optimal experience.